Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for the first of this series of Edit Online webinars. Very kindly sponsored by Clever, a market-leading edtech company who specialises in identity management, multi-factor authentication, and the digital classroom. Today, we are very pleased to have Pete Burgess from Clever here to speak to you all with his talk, Student MFA, A Realistic Path Forward. Pete assists UK academies and schools with cybersecurity and MFA at Clever. As always, there will be a Q&A session at the end of Peter's talk, and if any of you want to ask a question, then please feel free to use the chat box and post them up, and we'll try and get through as many as we can. Welcome, Pete. It's great to have you here today, and thanks for taking your time out to speak to us all.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here. I'm taking time out from my school holiday, actually, guys. So, and a big hello to you all. Hopefully not sweating away in little cupboards around the country, but probably that's exactly what's happening. I hope you've got a nice cold glass of water with ice. Delighted to be here to deliver this presentation. Something I've been thinking about an awful lot, actually. So I thought to the title, why start with why realistic? And I think it's because we've been wrestling, sort of as IT professionals, been wrestling with this for some time. And a lot of people, a lot of trusts and IT leaders that I've spoken to especially over the last 4 to 6 months, have been stuck and they've not known where to start. And I want to present some realistic options that can work for what is an absolutely terrible use case. I would argue that we're probably the worst case really for student MFA in terms of MFA done. Ultimately, MFA done properly is going to get in the way of learning, and ultimately, as enterprises, we're in the business of learning. So let's break it down. Look at some conflicting advice that we've been given and that we work to. Look at the standards that we need to achieve, and then we'll present our solutions, which hopefully can help a lot of you move forward on a realistic path. So I'm Pete. As mentioned, there's my email address. Would love to hear from you afterwards or during. Let's dive in now. I don't need to. I'm pretty sure I don't need to educate this audience on the severity of the cyber threats that we face. There are surveys that are live. This one from 30th of April, as recently as April 26, looking at the scale. And I'm not going to go into all those. I think from my experience chatting with professionals out there, we're aware of the risks, acutely aware of the risks, and busy defending against them. And there are some excellent practice out there that I know is shared amongst you on the forum. What I can add to that is just a little bit of global context. So as a business with a large and growing international team, this is a global problem. So we see this especially around. We've got detailed insights into Canada, Australia as well, and they're seeing the same shift in vulnerability. That I think that what gives me hope is the general consensus that we're seeing, or the trend that we're seeing, is that school leaders as well as just IT professionals are kind of being brought in. They're buying into this as they recognize the problem, they recognize the threat, they recognize that finances need to be attributed to solving this problem. So we see that this is the trend, and so we're seeing a little bit less resistance when it comes to reasonable expenditure on protecting our attack surface, our ridiculous attack surface. Here are the 3 primary organizations that will be on your desk or on as part of your awareness. So you've got effectively IASME and Cyber Essentials, emphasizing unique passcodes, passkeys, emphasis on kind of personal devices. Of course, we'll look at how that contradicts some of the DFE's requirements. We've also got the National Cybersecurity Centre, who kind of, to their credit, I think they take the Cyber Essentials requirements and they recognise that they provide a little clarity on top of the Cyber Essentials requirements, which I should mention haven't changed. So MFA is mandatory on all accounts. The marking criteria just changed, didn't it, last month in April, so that now you can't be accredited, you can't be certified if you don't have MFA on all accounts. And the MFA that they're looking at does tend to emphasize devices, unique passcodes or passkeys. The national, as I was saying, the National Cybersecurity Centre do a good job, in my opinion, of kind of mitigating some of the advice in a way. So their advice very clear to implement the strongest methods available. And I think really important is that caveat there where there may be technical or cost considerations that limit your choice. Well, in education, on our realistic path, there are both technical and cost considerations that are limiting our choices. Jumping then into, and I think what I would, where I've been encouraging and working with colleagues is on reframing and redirecting slightly towards the standards and saying, actually, the standards are the ones that we've looked at and that we're held accountable for. And then a lot of people are looking at Cyber Essentials and considering how they might maybe map those internally rather than going for the certification. That's the trend I'm seeing, not any advice from Clever or even personally. But the digital standards, let's look at those. What we're looking at the digital standard is certainly a move towards a stronger password. And ultimately, the conversations that I have, we still see it's very prevalent. Shared passwords, classroom, year group passwords, school passwords, even in many cases. And this is where kind of the ease of access to the device or the account is a kind of a tension with the security, right? So if that ease of access is hugely important, then the conversation we need to have around MFA often involves something like a QR code. We call it a Clever badge. And we need to look in detail at what your requirements are there. But let's look at what it actually says. Certainly, MFA, you should all have it for staff. I think generally, I don't think I've found anyone across the UK that doesn't already have that. Here's the bit on MFA for students. So they're requiring it where the verification does not need to be completed on a mobile phone. Now to the Cyber Essentials piece, we know that the mobile phone or the personal device ultimately is the way to provide a reasonably secure position. And anything less than that is less than ideal from rightly so, from a sort of cryptography perspective. Let's look as well at when we're supposed to have met this standard. So we're supposed to have already been meeting the standard to make sure our digital technology is protected. To be clear as well, all accounts are in scope. So there's no caveat or there's no escape route or clause that says, you don't have to protect younger students' accounts. We need to be protecting all accounts, and ideally with MFA for students where you don't need to be using mobile phones. This is the position we're in and in no uncertain terms, I've spoken with many of you who've talked about the frustrations that you have with that conflicting advice and the tension there. So we've got some unique challenges just to summarize. Ultimately, Cyber Essentials designed for enterprise, right, isn't it? So you've got employees with employment contracts who are computer literate and have a one-to-one device. So we couldn't be much different. We've got sort of low levels of literacy, low levels of typing, ability to character recognition, even ability to type usernames and passwords, which ultimately we've tended to kind of overly compensate for with simplistic passwords, and that's the position a lot of our trusts and schools find themselves in right now. And I've already mentioned the mobile element of this, so the complexities around mobile phones in terms of, I think generally the understanding nationally and amongst professionals is that at primary school we certainly can't expect, many of them do as we know, but we can't expect them to be using mobile devices. And then at secondary school, again, the sort of complexity and some of the operational considerations around mobile devices are mind-boggling amongst our teenagers. So we've got these unique challenges that are in the way of learning. And again, how do we forge this realistic path through those unique challenges? We all want our students to jump instantly into learning. It's a make or break moment, right? And it's the front door, but for the attackers, it's also the front door to our network. Traditional MFAs adding friction, which in the classroom setting we need to unlock. We looking at this problem globally, actually, so internationally, globally, we've worked with some of the largest and most forward-thinking educational organizations in the world. We've come up with our version of Classroom MFA, which is about achieving a flexible, age-appropriate MFA that doesn't get in the way of learning. I want to be clear at this point. Our approach is to work on an MFA design session on a one-to-one basis with each individual school or trust. There are many configs that can be, you'll all be aware, there are many configs that can apply. And we'll look at kind of who's the identity provider, whether Clever become the identity provider, whether it remains Google or Microsoft, or whether, and we've got complex, there are lots of questions, and we need to look at your entire tech stack really, and also your operationally, what resources are available to you and otherwise. But let's sort of get down to brass tacks. We've got eight factors, including kind of your YubiKeys, auth apps, SMS, your more traditional factors. And then also you've got your mobile free or your deviceless factors. So which you can see here, and you see the QR code, the Clever badge in the top right there. At the top, you've got like a 6-digit PIN. And we've got various incarnations of the picture login. So where you will cycle through two different rosters of an animal, then a fruit. And you can do that in cartoon or picture as an example. So this is about teaching students good cybersecurity, and it's about putting in the strongest factor to the NCSC's advice, the strongest factor possible within that sort of, and I think important to come back to it, that realistic ecosystem, if you will. So we've got, this is a diagram we show in pictures actually, and just to sort of show simplistically what can be protected. So our Classroom MFA can sit in front of Google Workspace, all your apps, and we have a portal where all your digital resources can live. It can also sit in front of Entra. And I'll show you there's another setup actually where Entra remains in front of Clever, which is a relatively new feature from Microsoft. I'm going to go and let's see this in practice. So we're going to do Classroom MFA into a Chromebook initially for you. So in this instance, Clever's operating as an identity provider protecting Google. So effectively, we talk about sitting in front of Google. I've got a nice badge that I flash, so something that I have, and then an animal, and then a food. The little ding is always very popular in schools and with students when they flash their badge. So here I go. I've got a nice setup there, effectively, where my landing page then ends up being the applications, and I single sign on straight through. So that's your ideal workflow. You've got a Chromebook that's protected with a second factor. We've then got, let's move on to Entra ID. So this one, we're going to see Classroom MFA logging into Entra. In this case, I alluded to this already. In this case, Entra ID is going to remain the IDP. So your first factor is your username and password. And then it's going to approve with Clever MFA. So effectively, it sends you off to authenticate with Clever at that point. At which point they're then authenticated into both Entra and Clever, interestingly, from a single sign-on perspective. We can go more into detail there. Other setups also have Microsoft sat in front of Google, so effectively you can be badging with MFA into all three of the identity providers. Just for those of you with more complex requirements, so you know. A word from Phil, Chief Information Officer, who down at Vita, who's actually installed. Jeez, hold on. I'm I have to use my mouse.
We wanted a solution which was scalable, which would work across our different schools in terms of age ranges, that teachers could manage on behalf of the students, so that it didn't disrupt learning in the classroom. So the impact of implementing MFA for students in the classroom has been greater security. We haven't seen an uptick in incidents, and much less disruption in terms of learning and management, less burden on the IT team for password management, good all round. Core components of a layered defense strategy for us are based around frameworks, particularly things like Cyber Essentials. We make sure that we're compliant with all of those. There is the DFE digital standards for education, and we are aligning ourselves with those as much as possible. It's a journey towards 2030. Then you've got everything else in the sector. So we're looking at making sure hardware, software platforms, and everything else are adequately secured where we can. In looking at implementing MFA for students, I would say planning, preparation, look for a solution that will scale, that will work across different age ranges. So not just one means of identification, something that offers a variety. Make sure that your staff are on board with the project and that they're supportive of it and understand why it's necessary. And then the same for the students. We have to put as much protection in as we can everywhere. If there's one thing that keeps me up at night, it's the unknowns.
Love Phil's advice there. Great, a great character and a great contact, actually. If any of you want to reach out to him, don't let him during half term. But I think his realistic approach to MFA I found quite refreshing, actually. Recognized, look, we need to be protecting our student accounts as much as we can. I think to that point, we're one of the other challenges that I've not mentioned that I think is crucial here when we're considering the realism of our approach is the shared devices, and that's the bit that really conflicts with passkeys and with Cyber Essentials, really. So where we've got shared devices that we need quick access to, and also we want to kind of be secure. Then the other bit to call out really is just the size of the attack surface. In many instances we've got a lot of younger learners who reasonably you would expect their parents also probably to have access to their accounts and know their username and passwords to support them. So really, it's not only our student users, but also kind of their parents and their families. And so, in terms of an attack surface, it's vast, right? Some of the important factors here that Phil mentioned, and I think did a good job of there, is this ability then to configure and manage and track up our MFA policies to match our needs. And that's where really Clever shines as a solution designed specifically for education. So you've got delegated support tools that make sense for schools, where you've got troubleshooting available directly in the Clever teacher portal. So where, and as well as bypass options for guardians to unblock access at home. So those important components have been thought about, and that's really where you need to consider. It's all part of the consideration. So not only what factors, but also how are we managing this operationally? Who resets? I don't want to add a load more tickets to your desk. You already got more than enough. And so this is about being able to track the enforcement policies for peace of mind with your rollout as well. So that operational piece, huge consideration. So moving on from there, you kind of eliminating your IT tickets, saving times, preparing teachers with training materials, and then avoiding student hacking with better security. So we're improving our posture and improving the security at every step, new layers of security effectively. Let's say a student's forgotten the MFA second factors. How can the teacher help them without submitting an IT ticket? I want to caveat this with, you may choose to not have your teachers be able to. I think most trust that I've spoken to, certainly they're interested in teachers being able to do that. And it'll depend on, you've got to consider within the classroom setting, so how many kind of tickets are being raised, whether you've got students walking around the school going to collect or do their passwords, etc., get new passwords, resets. So let's look at the Clever experience there.
Okay, so I am a teacher and Barbara told me that she needs help logging in. So I'm in my Clever portal, and since she has MFA enabled, I can see her specific MFA pictures. And if she also needs help with her Enter ID credentials, I can see those and help her as well. I can even help her with her Clever password as well if she needs to set a new one. So plenty of tools to help Barbara log in.
Effectively, what you've seen there, and there are granular controls available to each of our installs, whereby you can determine whether a teacher has access to the Entra password, whether they're able to change it there and then, whether they're able to see and the MFA tokens, etc. So all that's within control. And what we wanted to show you there was kind of the maximum available position where I want to fully empower my teachers to be able to get around and navigate past any password issues that they experience in the classroom setting. So getting out of the way of learning. Here, just a quick grid for you. So this is, and I amended this slide just before the presentation to say example recommendations rather than broad recommendations. Just with emphasis on, we would look at trust by trust, school by school, why, and be able to sort of reason and justify to you the recommendation in terms of what is the most realistic path, what's going to cause, the balance of disruption to learning versus ease of access. So something to consider in terms of the password, the options there. 1 second all. Slight half-term issue there. I won't go into it. He's meant to be in Spain. Right. So those are your recommendations. We look specifically at those making this an age-appropriate experience, which I think is really important. And we can personalize that. So you might look at Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2. You might look at Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4. And it's that sort of NCSC position where we're saying we want to be applying the strongest factors available based on kind of ability, devices, and then your operational constraints that you're working with, manpower, etc. You can see there up at 12 and 13. Generally, we recommend you can use an authenticator app, for example. So at that point, the device is in play. Here is an example that I've done for a primary school in the past. So in this instance, they wanted that first factor. So one of the tensions that we get is with your first factor, your core password, and this is a huge part of the DFE standards, is making that initial password stronger. When you put a Clever badge in as a first factor, so that which requires, you can see at the bottom there, it requires domain or subdomain federation in Entra. And then you're in as a third-party SSO in Google. So, but when you want that badge, effectively you can strengthen your passwords, because most of the time in a classroom setting they're using a badge instead of the username and password as the first factor, and then you're dropping in with that second factor with your picture. So that's one particular config and setup. Another one, so that the secondary one, typically you'd leave Microsoft as the identity provider and just drop in, quite often with a pin. We do have the Clever badge, which is in the background there. So you can have an MFA badge, which is different from that first factor badge. MFA badges rely on a camera, of course. And so generally, when you're considering how ubiquitous camera, what devices they're going to be accessing your cloud services on, we tend to shy away from the badges. That's been my experience in the UK so far. But again, it would all be considered on a case-by-case basis for you. Ultimately, So we've made Classroom MFA even more powerful. So it now, and less likely to result in MFA fatigue or cause blockers. So it now integrates with Edge, so it can recognize a trusted device. Your students and staff on Entra joined Windows devices aren't stopped by an MFA prompt every time they log in. We can look at, and more broadly, once you look at our MFA sort of setup more broadly in terms of like context awareness, trusted networks. So I know, for example, on Cyber Essentials, trusted networks isn't generally considered acceptable now, and you might even put that stronger, but it is there as an option. So depending on our operational requirements, whether or not we want to challenge just on a trusted network or not. So you've got the option, and then we leave it to you to decide from an IT, as IT professionals and cyber security professionals. Your conditional access management is made easy though, and the edge option is a nice option as well, and relatively new within the Clever ecosystem. Ultimately, then wrapping up as an overview before questions and answers. Effectively, you've got in Clever, you've got a unified identity. It's worth calling out that we link with Bromcom and Arbor there, as you see. You can also SFTP, and then we also link with Salamander and/or Locker for the identity information in order to be able to protect the identity providers. As you can see, we work, and we mentioned and referenced Google and Microsoft plenty. But ultimately, this is about powering the secure digital learning in your ecosystem, making it easier to access the devices as well as more secure. So secure digital learning. And that way the right people in your school community are easily and securely accessing the resources that they need. There's an awful lot that I should mention that we can do at no cost as well. So Clever's just as a quick overview, our single sign-on, our rostering, our analytics, and Clever badges as a first factor are all actually free within paid for by our application partners. The MFA functionality that I've mentioned, we'll be very upfront with. It's £1.50 per user per year, not per month, Microsoft. So that's available and very reasonable in cybersecurity terms. In order to put that in, so I've mentioned the MFA design sessions that we run. We'd love to run a design session with your trust, especially at this time of year. The timing is crucial leading up to the new academic year, but you've still got time to, we offer a 30-day preview. So in a preview setup, and one of our engineers will work with you. We'll run an MFA design session, and then the recommended setups we'll put in as a test or a preview so that you can actually experience in your live environments, feel happy with, confident, which is really important leading into your new academic year, because you don't want to be putting something in that you feel less than confident with, especially when it's so central and crucial, affecting so many users. Here you are in visually, so you've got your MFA design and technical call and your sync, moving on to kind of getting your proof of concept going, measuring your impact, and then full rollout and trainings. We'd generally run that with you and provide something a bit more bespoke for you, but that gives you a rough idea. You certainly can, in the simplest instance, so something like the Microsoft Entra, so the Microsoft external authentication method, we could have that up and running easily on a preview within a couple of weeks. The setup's fairly simple, and you're not tinkering at all with kind of the Microsoft username and password. So something to bear in mind. Worth calling out before we open up, this is our cybersecurity practice aligned with the UK Cybersecurity Centre. We've identified 5 top strategies. There's actually here you see our 2026 Cyber Secure report, worth downloading, and comes with those 5 top strategies that we can look for, of which MFA, so protecting user logins with complex passwords, and MFA, of course, needs to be right up there, high priority. And so I'll leave, hopefully, I've rifled through it, I'm aware. Welcome questions in any detail. and we'll call Chris back in, and then I'll be joined by my colleague Marlene as well, who's more of on the engineer and technical side.
Brilliant, thanks, Pete. That was a really, really good talk. I enjoyed that. Yeah, we'll go through some questions now, and we've got ones posted up on the side. If anybody's still watching this online and you have a question, please post it up, and we'll present it to Clever, and we'll get you an answer. So the first question we got from the site, well, there's two questions from Pete. First question being, how do you deal with trends? If, for example, a Pixar movie about pigs has been released and 80% of students use pig as their second factor, I can't honestly say to an auditor that year that the group has an effective MFA. How would you go about letting schools know about fads and how kids do latch on to certain things?
What do you think, Marlene?
It's a good question. And I think what stumped me was the Pixar piece, because we do have to take, I think Pete made a really good point at the beginning of the call where he talked about how this is a very specific use case and potentially even the worst use case, because we are dealing with a specific subgroup of people. I think specifically when we're talking about younger learners, and immediately when I think about Pixar and animal, I'll think about that second factor and what that looks like. And that second factor would be an animal and then a fruit, adding into consideration Clever's reset abilities. So if a user, let's say that user is attempting to log in, they will automatically get logged out after 4 failed attempts versus any other second factor, which can take anywhere from 8 to 10 attempts.
I think you put that very well there. That lockout, I think, is a really important consideration. Ultimately, the trends kind of come and go. You know, if it was one number then another number, then everybody would have 6, 7, right? But which I take it. Ultimately, you can't do too much. That's why there are 2 pictures rather than 1. And ultimately, it's part of your sort of security posture. The 4 lockouts is key, I think, where Microsoft tends to recommend 10. I know that 10 is recommended on, I think it's 10 recommended NCSC or IASME, one of the two or both. But 10 is quite high, isn't it? And then so we drop in with the 4th. The actual cryptography behind it is less secure, but ultimately you mitigate that with the lockouts as well, and to be not even mentioned, but we've got full access logs and management behind the scenes as well, seeing who's logging in and how and when.
Okay, and we have a second question from Pete, which is where a lot of companies say our badges can't be forged. They'd say that's disingenuous as they can be trivially photocopied, removing the need for a more technical approach. What, if any, countermeasures do they have if someone shows a photo of a badge on a phone or a photocopy of a badge? Is the login dialog looking for a valid QR code, or is it looking at the context around you to see if anything's not right?
Yeah, another really good question. And so the QR code is looking for a match. So it's looking to make sure that it looks the same as what's provided to that specific user. So you do make a good point in that user can flash, let's say their parent takes a picture of their badge. They can go again and flash that. Again, we have those 4 lockouts set by default. I think the other piece to consider as well is how, in that scenario, if that is a concern, how you want to layer or design your multi-factor authentication. Because, for example, we worked with a trust that deployed MFA, and for this specific reason, because as children get older, they get sneakier. At year 4 and above, what they did was they enabled a PIN. So they had the primary first factor be the badge, and then they enabled a PIN for that second factor to keep that experience unique. Again, I also think that we work in a specific industry where it's very hard to keep things secure, but also simple. And I think that's what the badge does and helps with, because as we're looking to amplify our security, we're also looking at how are we amplifying security, but also simplifying logins for our primary learners, because that still continues to be an issue. And also thinking about how do we prevent pushback from teachers when we're deploying these new products.
That's right. I think it's that, the NCSC bit that I mentioned, that we are working with technical and cost constraints that we're working to mitigate and work around, right? So, your ideal position is one-to-one deployment, pass keys, FIDO keys, UB keys, whatever. From a cost perspective, we'd need that would need to be funded, wouldn't it?
Yeah, there's always the cost question that comes into it there. Yes, I don't think we have any more questions. So, Peter, Melanie, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today, and everybody for attending. Please join us again on Thursday at 2 p.m. when we'll have Emily Platt from We Trade Tech here to talk about recycling and how they have created a rather unique and hassle-free way for schools to recycle their old IT equipment. Oh, apologies, we do have 2 more questions. So there must be 2 last-minute entries here. Hang on, we're just waiting for them to appear on the screen. Okay, how long typically does it take to implement? I am meaning just Office 365 config side before dealing with training.
Yeah, we saw that question in the chat as well. So implementation, it can take anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks. And when I mean 3 to 4 weeks, I mean from the moment that we create your Clever account and we enable sort of that 30-day preview, that you can essentially set everything up so that when you do want to go live and deploy this and consider training into consideration, all you have to do is click a button, essentially.
Okay.
It's the strength, isn't it, of ours in terms of, once you get to see the interface and design for education. So because you've got the Clever sort of interface sat on top of it, that the implementation and it is supported as well. So you do get onboarding support, the help of expert engineers who've done this a lot.
Yeah, excellent. And one last question is, we are from Paul Williams. We are using conditional access to limit access from IPs for pupil accounts currently. Does this play well with that?
Yes, it does. And conditional access is actually how you deploy this specifically. If we're specifically talking about an Entra admin console, that is how Clever MFA is deployed.
Okay, brilliant. And I think that's it. So as always, thank you very much for joining us both, Peter and Marlon.